My wife started hiding her phone and staying late at work. I hired a private investigator. When he showed me the photos, I couldn't believe my eyes. She was seeing my own brother. I hired the best lawyer in town, but even he was shocked by what else we uncovered. The coffee cup trembled in Marcus Wellington's hands as he stared at the photographs spread across the mahogany desk. His world, carefully constructed over 15 years of marriage, crumbled like autumn leaves in a violent storm. There, in crisp black and white clarity, was his wife Serafina, locked in an embrace with a man whose face he knew better than his own reflection. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife could ever penetrate. For the man holding his wife was not a stranger. It was his younger brother, Dmitri. Marcus had always prided himself on being observant. As a successful architect, his eye for detail had built him a reputation that stretched across 3 states. Yet somehow, he had missed the most important blueprints of all, the ones mapping out his own destruction. The signs had been there, scattered like breadcrumbs leading to this moment of devastating revelation. Serafina's late nights at the advertising agency had multiplied like weeds in spring. Her phone, once carelessly left on kitchen counters and bedside tables, now lived permanently attached to her palm, its screen always facing down, its secrets locked away behind passwords she claimed to have forgotten. The transformation had been so gradual, so carefully orchestrated, that Marcus wondered if he had been living with a master manipulator all along. Serafina, with her cascade of auburn hair and eyes the color of stormy seas, had always been theatrical. It was what had first drawn him to her at that college drama production 20 years ago. She had played Juliet, and he had fallen harder than Romeo ever could have imagined. But now, that same theatrical nature that had once charmed him felt like a cruel joke, a performance that had lasted decades. Private investigator Jake Morrison watched Marcus process the evidence with the patience of a man who had delivered life-altering news countless times before. His weathered face, marked by years of uncovering uncomfortable truths, showed no emotion as he slid another envelope across the desk. "There's more, Mr. Wellington," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of impending doom. "These financial records you asked me to look into, they tell a story you're not going to like." The photographs were devastating enough, but what lay hidden in those financial documents would prove to be the earthquake that brought down everything Marcus thought he knew about his life. As he opened the envelope with hands that seemed to belong to someone else, he couldn't have imagined that his brother's betrayal was merely the surface of an ocean of deception so deep it would take months to fully explore its depths. Marcus had built his architectural firm, Wellington and Associates, from nothing, starting in a cramped apartment with a drafting table and a dream. He had slowly constructed an empire that now employed 47 people and had designed some of the most recognizable buildings in the metropolitan area. The Wellington name meant something in their city. It represented integrity, innovation, and unwavering quality. But as he stared at the bank statements Morrison had obtained, he began to understand that his name might soon represent something entirely different. The numbers danced before his eyes like cruel spirits mocking his intelligence. Transfers, withdrawals, and mysterious payments painted a picture of systematic theft that stretched back nearly 3 years. Serafina's signature appeared on documents he had never seen, authorizing expenditures he had never approved. His brother Dmitri's name surfaced repeatedly, linked to consulting fees for services that, as far as Marcus knew, had never been rendered. "Your wife has been funneling money through a series of shell companies," Morrison explained, his finger tracing the paper trail like a detective following footprints in snow. "Your brother appears to be the primary beneficiary. They've been very careful, very methodical. This isn't the work of amateurs, Mr. Wellington. This is sophisticated financial fraud. The room seemed to spin as Marcus absorbed the magnitude of the deception. Serafina hadn't just broken his heart. She had systematically dismantled his life's work, stealing not just his money, but his dreams, his employees' futures, and the legacy he had hoped to leave behind. The woman who had shared his bed for 15 years, who had kissed him goodbye each morning and welcomed him home each evening, had been methodically destroying everything he had built. But the cruelest cut of all was Dimitri's involvement. 5 years younger than Marcus, Dimitri had always been the charming one, the one who could talk his way out of any situation with a smile and a clever word. Their parents had doted on him, and Marcus had never minded. He had taken pride in his role as the responsible older brother, the one who cleaned up Dimitri's messes and provided guidance when their parents' patience wore thin. When Dimitri had struggled to find his footing after college, Marcus had offered him work at the firm. When Dimitri needed money for his various business ventures, Marcus had been the first to open his wallet. The photographs Morrison had taken showed Dimitri and Serafina at an upscale restaurant across town, their body language speaking of intimacy that went far beyond a casual affair. They sat close together, their hands intertwined, their faces animated with the kind of joy Marcus hadn't seen in his wife's eyes for months. In one particularly painful image, Dimitri was placing what appeared to be an expensive piece of jewelry around Serafina's neck. Jewelry that Marcus now realized had likely been purchased with his own stolen money. "How long have you suspected?" Morrison asked, gathering the photographs into a neat stack. Marcus considered the question carefully. When had the first seeds of doubt been planted? Perhaps it was 6 months ago when Serafina had suddenly developed an interest in working late. Her advertising agency, Meridian Creative, had supposedly landed several high-profile clients that demanded round-the-clock attention. Marcus had been proud of her success, even as he missed their evening walks and quiet dinners together. He had supported her ambition, never questioning why these urgent projects always seemed to require her presence on weekends and holidays. Or maybe it had been the phone calls that stopped abruptly when he entered a room, the way she would suddenly claim she needed to take a shower when a text message arrived. There had been new clothes appearing in her closet, expensive pieces that seemed beyond what her salary could afford. When he had commented on a beautiful silk scarf, she had laughed and claimed it was a bonus from a grateful client. The lies had been so smooth, so effortlessly delivered, that he had accepted them without question. The truth was, Marcus realized, he had been willfully blind. Somewhere deep in his subconscious, he had registered the changes, but had chosen to ignore them. Love, it seemed, was not just blind, but deliberately obtuse, when the alternative was too painful to contemplate. He had trusted Serafina and Dimitri so completely that the possibility of their betrayal had simply never entered his conscious mind. "I think I knew something was wrong about 3 months ago," Marcus finally answered. "But I convinced myself I was being paranoid. I thought maybe she was planning a surprise party for my birthday or working on some secret project. I never imagined." His voice trailed off as the full weight of his naivety settled upon him. Morrison nodded with understanding. "In my experience, the people closest to us are often the ones capable of causing the deepest wounds. They know exactly where to strike, because they know exactly where we're most vulnerable." The private investigator was right, Marcus realized. Serafina and Dimitri had intimate knowledge of his weaknesses, his blind spots, his unwavering trust in family. They had weaponized his love against him, using his devotion as a shield to hide their crimes. The very qualities that made him a good husband and brother, loyalty, generosity, trust, had been turned into tools of his destruction. As Marcus left Morrison's office that evening, the city lights blurred through his tears like watercolors in rain. The photographs and financial documents tucked safely in his briefcase felt heavier than concrete, their contents promising to demolish not just his marriage, but potentially his entire professional reputation. He drove through familiar streets that now seemed foreign, past the restaurant where he and Serafina had celebrated their anniversary just 2 months ago, past the park where he and Dmitri had played as children. Everything felt contaminated by the knowledge of their betrayal. Memories that had once brought him joy now felt like elaborate lies, performances put on for his benefit while the real drama played out behind closed doors. How many times had Serafina kissed him goodbye in the morning and then spent the day in his brother's arms? How many family dinners had they shared, with Dmitri sitting across the table, knowing he was systematically stealing from the very man who had given him everything? The house Marcus returned to that night felt like a mausoleum filled with the ghosts of false happiness. Serafina was already asleep, or pretending to be, her breathing deep and regular in the darkness beside him. He lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling and wondering how many nights she had lain in this same bed, planning his destruction while he slept peacefully beside her. But Marcus Wellington was not a man to be destroyed easily. As the first light of dawn crept through their bedroom windows, he made a decision that would change everything. He would not simply divorce Serafina and cut ties with Dmitri. He would ensure that their crimes were exposed, that justice was served, and that the full extent of their deception was brought to light. They had underestimated him, assuming that his love and trust made him weak. They were about to discover just how wrong they were. The next morning, Marcus called the most respected criminal defense attorney in the city, a woman named Victoria Cross, whose reputation for thoroughness was legendary. If Morrison's evidence was accurate, Marcus would need more than a divorce lawyer. He would need someone capable of navigating the complex world of financial fraud and criminal conspiracy. As he dialed her number, his hands no longer trembled. The devastating shock of discovery had crystallized into something far more dangerous. Cold, calculated determination. Serafina emerged from the shower as Marcus was finishing his coffee, her hair wrapped in a towel, her face bright with the kind of morning cheerfulness that now seemed sickeningly false. "You're up early?" she commented, kissing his cheek with lips that had so recently kissed his brother. "Big day at the office?" Marcus studied her face, searching for any hint of guilt or recognition that their charade was coming to an end. But Serafina was, as always, a consummate performer. Her smile was genuine, her manner affectionate, her deception flawless. "Something like that," he replied evenly, marveling at her ability to maintain the pretense even now. As he drove to his office that morning, Marcus reflected on the strange clarity that had emerged from the chaos of discovery. For months, he had felt confused and disconnected, unable to understand why his marriage felt strained, why his relationship with Dmitri seemed different. Now, with the truth laid bare, everything made perfect sense. The confusion had lifted like morning fog, revealing a landscape that was devastated but finally visible. The real work was just beginning. Victoria Cross possessed the kind of presence that filled a room before she even entered it. Her reputation preceded her like thunder before lightning. And when she finally agreed to meet with Marcus 3 days after his initial call, he understood why she was considered the most formidable attorney in the state. Tall and elegant, with silver hair that caught the light like spun metal, and eyes that seemed to see through pretense to truth. She listened to Marcus's story with the intensity of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. Her office overlooked the city from the 32nd floor of the Meridian Tower, and as Marcus spread Morrison's evidence across her conference table, he couldn't help but notice that they could see the building housing Serafina's advertising agency from the window. The irony was not lost on him. From this height, even the scene of his betrayal looked small and manageable. "Mr. Wellington," Victoria said after reviewing the financial documents with meticulous care, "what you've uncovered here goes far beyond marital infidelity. This is organized fraud on a scale that suggests professional criminal knowledge. Your wife and brother haven't just stolen from you. They've created an intricate network designed to systematically drain your assets while maintaining plausible deniability." She pulled up a document that Marcus recognized as one of his company's quarterly reports. According to this, Wellington and Associates has been paying consulting fees to something called Meridian Development Group for specialized architectural services. Are you familiar with this company? Marcus shook his head, a cold dread settling in his stomach. "I've never heard of them. All our subcontractors go through me personally." Meridian Development Group is a shell company registered in Delaware. Victoria continued, her finger tracing the corporate structure she had rapidly researched. The sole proprietor is listed as one David Meridian, but the banking information leads back to accounts controlled by your brother. They've been billing your company for services that were never rendered, using forged authorization documents bearing your signature. The scope of the deception was breathtaking in its audacity. Marcus had prided himself on maintaining tight control over his company's finances. Yet somehow, an entire parallel operation had been running under his nose. How is that possible? I review every major expenditure personally. Victoria's smile was sharp as a blade. That's where your wife's position becomes crucial. As someone with intimate knowledge of your business practices and access to your personal information, she would have been able to time these fraudulent transactions to avoid your review. Notice how these payments all occurred during periods when you were traveling for major projects or dealing with client emergencies. The pattern was clear once pointed out. Every stolen dollar had been taken during moments when Marcus was too distracted or overwhelmed to notice unusual financial activity. Serafina had used her knowledge of his schedule, his habits, and his trust in her to orchestrate the perfect times to strike. She had turned their marriage into a weapon against him, using their intimacy to predict and exploit his vulnerabilities. But Victoria was just getting started. As she dug deeper into the financial web that Morrison had uncovered, patterns emerged that painted an even more disturbing picture. Your brother has been using the stolen funds to invest in real estate, she explained, showing Marcus property records that made his blood run cold. He's purchased 3 commercial properties and a luxury condominium, all in the past 18 months. The total value exceeds $2 million. $2 million. The number hit Marcus like a physical blow. He thought of his employees, hard-working people who depended on Wellington and Associates for their livelihoods. He thought of the clients who trusted him with their dreams and their money. The theft wasn't just personal. It was a betrayal of everyone who had believed in him and his company. "There's something else," Victoria said, her tone growing even more serious. "I've discovered that your brother has been using his connection to your firm to secure contracts with other companies. He's been representing himself as a partner in Wellington and Associates, using your reputation to win business that he then diverts to his own operations." The revelation was like discovering that someone had been wearing his face to commit crimes across the city. Dmitri hadn't just stolen his money. He had stolen his identity, his reputation, his professional standing. Companies that thought they were doing business with a reliable, trustworthy Wellington firm had actually been dealing with an imposter who was using their confidence to fund his criminal enterprise. Marcus felt a rage building inside him that was unlike anything he had ever experienced. This wasn't the hot anger of a moment of betrayal. This was cold, calculating fury that demanded not just justice, but complete exposure of the elaborate lie his life had become. "What are our options?" he asked Victoria, his voice steady despite the inferno burning in his chest. "We have several paths forward," she replied, organizing the documents into neat stacks. "Criminal charges for fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. Civil suits to recover the stolen assets. And we can pursue charges against any accomplices who helped facilitate these crimes." The word accomplices hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Marcus realized that a conspiracy of this magnitude couldn't have been carried out by just two people. Someone at Serafina's agency must have helped create the fake billing documents. Someone at the bank must have overlooked the suspicious pattern of transfers. Someone in Dimitri's new real estate ventures must have known that the funding came from questionable sources. "How deep does this go?" Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Victoria's expression grew grim. "That's what we need to find out. But Mr. Wellington, I have to warn you. Once we start pulling these threads, we might unravel more than you're prepared to handle. Criminal investigations have a way of exposing secrets that everyone involved would prefer to keep buried." Over the next several days, Victoria's team of investigators began the painstaking process of following the money trail that Dimitri and Serafina had created. What they discovered painted a picture of corruption that extended far beyond a simple case of marital infidelity and financial theft. The web of deception had tentacles that reached into multiple businesses, several banks, and a network of accomplices who had profited from the systematic destruction of Marcus's life. The fake consulting company, Meridian Development Group, had been operating for over 2 years, billing not just Wellington and Associates, but several other architectural firms for services that were never provided. Dimitri had essentially created a parasitic business that fed off the reputation and connections of legitimate companies, using forged documents and stolen identities to secure contracts worth millions of dollars. Serafina's role had been crucial to the operation's success. Her position at Meridian Creative gave her access to sophisticated document creation software and professional printing equipment. She had been creating fake invoices, forged contracts, and counterfeit letterhead with the same skills she once brought to legitimate advertising campaigns. More importantly, her intimate knowledge of Marcus's business practices allowed her to time the fraud perfectly, ensuring that stolen money was taken during periods when Marcus was too busy to notice unusual transactions. But the investigation revealed something even more troubling. Serafina and Dimitri weren't working alone. They had recruited a network of accomplices that included a corrupt bank manager who facilitated suspicious transfers, a real estate agent who helped launder money through property purchases, and even an accountant who had been falsifying tax documents to hide the stolen funds. The corruption ran so deep that Victoria eventually recommended bringing in federal investigators. What had started as a case of marital betrayal had evolved into a complex criminal enterprise that crossed state lines and involved multiple financial institutions. The FBI's white-collar crime unit was interested, very interested, in the sophisticated money laundering operation that Dimitri and Serafina had constructed. As the investigation expanded, Marcus found himself living in a surreal world where nothing was as it seemed. His wife continued to come home each evening, kiss him hello, and ask about his day, all while federal agents were building a case that would eventually send her to prison. Dimitri still called regularly, still invited Marcus to family dinners, still played the role of loving brother, even as prosecutors were preparing charges that could result in decades behind bars. The cognitive dissonance was almost unbearable. Marcus would sit across from Serafina at dinner, watching her laugh at something on television, and wonder how someone could live such a complete lie. She seemed genuinely happy, genuinely affectionate, genuinely concerned about his welfare. If he hadn't seen the evidence with his own eyes, he would never have believed her capable of such elaborate deception. But perhaps the most disturbing discovery came when Victoria's investigators uncovered the timeline of the affair. Based on credit card records, hotel receipts, and digital communications, they determined that Serafina and Dimitri's relationship had begun almost 3 years ago. Shortly after Marcus had hired Dimitri at the firm and given him access to sensitive business information. The timing suggested that the affair and the fraud had been planned together from the beginning. This wasn't a case of a romantic relationship that had gradually led to financial crimes. This was a calculated assault on Marcus's life that had used seduction as a tool of theft. Dimitri had apparently courted Serafina specifically to gain access to Marcus's business and personal information, turning his brother's trust into a weapon of mass destruction. The revelation that his wife's love had been purchased, that her affection had been part of an elaborate con game, cut deeper than any financial loss ever could. Marcus had been prepared to discover that Serafina had fallen out of love with him, that she had found someone else who made her happier. But to learn that her feelings had been fabricated from the beginning, that their entire relationship had been built on lies designed to facilitate his destruction, was a betrayal that struck at the very core of his identity. Yet even as the evidence mounted, Marcus found himself clinging to fragments of hope. Surely some of their relationship had been genuine. Surely the woman who had held him when his father died, who had celebrated his professional victories and comforted him through his failures, couldn't have been acting for 15 years. Surely there had been moments when her love was real, when her touch was motivated by genuine affection rather than criminal calculation. But Victoria's investigators were thorough, and as they dug deeper into the digital communications between Serafina and Dimitri, they uncovered messages that shattered even these last remnants of hope. Text exchanges revealed the calculated nature of their deception, with Serafina reporting Marcus's schedule and vulnerabilities, while Dimitri provided instructions for maximizing their theft while minimizing suspicion. One message, sent just weeks before Marcus discovered the affair, was particularly devastating. He actually thanked me for working so hard for the family's future. If only he knew how hard I really am working. The mocking tone, the casual cruelty, the complete absence of any genuine feeling for the man whose life she was systematically destroying. It was almost too much for Marcus to process. Victoria watched him read these messages with the compassion of someone who had witnessed the destruction of innocence many times before. "Mr. Wellington," she said gently, "I know this is incredibly difficult, but I need you to understand that the evidence we're gathering isn't just about recovering your money. These people have committed serious federal crimes. They've betrayed not just you, but everyone who trusted them. The investigation has to continue, no matter how painful the revelations might be." Marcus nodded, understanding that he was no longer just a victim seeking justice. He was a crucial witness in a case that would ultimately send multiple people to federal prison. The personal nature of the betrayal had been subsumed into something larger, something that demanded accountability not just for the money that had been stolen, but for the elaborate system of lies that had made the theft possible. As the investigation neared its conclusion, Marcus realized that his old life was gone forever. Even if he recovered every stolen dollar, even if every criminal was brought to justice, he could never go back to being the man who trusted completely and loved without reservation. The naive optimism that had made him vulnerable to this deception was gone, burned away by the heat of betrayal and the cold light of truth. But in its place, something stronger was emerging. A determination to rebuild not just his finances, but his entire approach to relationships and trust. A commitment to ensuring that the people who had destroyed his life faced full consequences for their actions. And a growing sense that perhaps, in the end, discovering the truth was a gift that would allow him to build something better than what he had lost. The reckoning was coming, and Marcus Wellington was ready. The morning that would change everything dawned clear and cold, with frost painting delicate patterns on the windows of the Wellington home. Marcus stood in his kitchen, drinking coffee and watching Serafina prepare for what she believed would be just another day of deception. She hummed softly as she gathered her things, the same melody she had hummed throughout their marriage, an unconscious habit that had once charmed him and now served as a mocking soundtrack to her performance. "I'll be late again tonight," she said, adjusting her scarf in the hallway mirror. "The Henderson account is being particularly demanding. We might not finish until after 10. The lie rolled off her tongue with practiced ease, delivered with just the right amount of frustrated exhaustion to make it believable. If Marcus hadn't known the truth, he would have felt sorry for her, perhaps offered to pick up dinner or suggested a weekend getaway to help her relax. Instead, he simply nodded and kissed her goodbye, tasting betrayal on her lips, while she smiled and promised to call if she was running even later than expected. As her car disappeared down their tree-lined street, Marcus allowed himself a moment of grief for the woman he had thought he married. The woman who had never actually existed except in his hopeful imagination. Victoria Cross had scheduled the confrontation for 11 o'clock that morning in the conference room of her law office. By the time Serafina and Dmitri arrived, separately of course, maintaining their charade of casual acquaintance even as the walls closed in around them, Marcus was already seated at the polished table, surrounded by boxes of evidence that documented their crimes in excruciating detail. The expression on Serafina's face when she walked into the room and saw Marcus sitting beside Victoria would remain etched in his memory forever. For just a moment, her carefully constructed mask slipped, revealing something cold and calculating beneath the surface. Then, like an actress catching herself missing a cue, she quickly rearranged her features into an expression of confusion and concern. "Marcus, what's going on? Why are we meeting with your lawyer?" Her voice carried just the right note of bewildered innocence, but Marcus could see the rapid calculations happening behind her eyes as she assessed the situation and searched for an exit strategy. Dimitri's reaction was different. He walked into the room with his characteristic confidence, flashing his charming smile as if this were just another family gathering. But when he saw the photographs spread across the table, images of him and Serafina in intimate embrace, financial documents bearing his forged signature, property records showing his unexplained wealth, his face went pale and his famous charm evaporated like morning mist. "Before we begin," Victoria announced in a voice that could have carved marble, "I need to inform you both that this conversation is being recorded and that you have the right to have your own attorneys present. I also need to inform you that federal investigators are already aware of your activities, and warrants for your arrest will be issued within the next 48 hours. The silence that followed was so complete that Marcus could hear the traffic on the street 32 floors below. Serafina sank into a chair as if her legs had suddenly forgotten how to support her weight, while Dmitri remained standing, his hands gripping the back of a chair so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. "I don't understand," Serafina whispered. But her voice lacked the conviction she had brought to 15 years of lies. She was still trying to maintain her performance, but the script had suddenly changed, and she hadn't had time to learn her new lines. Victoria began laying out the evidence with the methodical precision of a surgeon dissecting a particularly complex case. She showed them the photographs documenting their affair, the financial records proving their theft, the property purchases made with stolen money, and the network of accomplices who had helped facilitate their crimes. Each revelation was delivered with clinical detachment. But Marcus could see the devastating impact of each piece of evidence as it destroyed their carefully constructed denials. The federal investigation has uncovered evidence of mail fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit racketeering. Victoria continued, her voice never varying from its professional monotone. The total amount of stolen funds exceeds $3 million when you include the fraudulent contracts your shell company secured using Mr. Wellington's reputation and credentials. $3 million. The number was even higher than Marcus had initially believed, representing not just his stolen savings, but the systematic theft of his life's work and professional reputation. He watched Dimitri's face as the full scope of their exposure became clear, seeing his brother age 10 years in as many minutes. But it was Serafina's reaction that truly captured Marcus's attention. As the evidence mounted and her situation became undeniably clear, something fundamental shifted in her demeanor. The loving wife persona that she had maintained for so long began to crack and peel away like old paint, revealing something harder and more calculating underneath. "You have no idea what you've started," she said finally, her voice taking on a tone that Marcus had never heard before. Gone was the warm, affectionate woman who had shared his bed for 15 years. In her place sat someone cold and predatory, someone who looked at him with the same expression a chess master might wear when contemplating a particularly stubborn opponent. Marcus always thought he was so smart, she continued, her transformation now complete. So successful, so trustworthy, so beloved by everyone. Do you have any idea how exhausting it is to live with someone who's that perfect? Someone who makes you feel like you're constantly falling short just by existing? The words hit Marcus like physical blows, not because they were hurtful, but because they revealed the depth of resentment that had apparently been festering beneath the surface of their marriage for years. This wasn't a woman who had gradually fallen out of love or been swept away by passion for another man. This was someone who had harbored active hatred for him while sleeping beside him every night. Someone who had used his love as a weapon to destroy him. Dimitri, meanwhile, had found his voice and was attempting to mount a defense that relied heavily on blaming others for his actions. "Serafina convinced me that Marcus was planning to fire me anyway," he claimed, his charm now sounding desperate and hollow. "She said he'd been talking about downsizing the company, getting rid of family members who weren't pulling their weight. She made it sound like I was just taking what I was owed before he could cut me loose." The lie was so transparent, so obviously rehearsed, that Marcus almost felt embarrassed for his brother. But Victoria was already pulling out documents that proved Dimitri had been planning his theft long before he and Serafina had even met. Evidence that he had been researching Marcus's business practices and financial vulnerabilities for months before making his move. "The digital forensics team recovered deleted files from your computer," Victoria explained to Dimitri with obvious satisfaction, "including detailed plans for creating shell companies, lists of Marcus's major clients with notes about their billing cycles, and research into money laundering techniques. This wasn't a crime of passion or desperation, Mr. Wellington. This was a carefully planned assault on your brother's life and livelihood." As the full scope of their premeditation became clear, Marcus found himself studying the two people who had shared his most intimate moments for years. How had he lived so closely with individuals capable of such elaborate deception? How had he missed the signs of their fundamental dishonesty, their complete lack of genuine affection for him? But perhaps the most disturbing revelation came when Victoria presented evidence of their future plans. Recovered communications showed that Serafina and Dmitri had been planning to disappear once they had stolen enough money to fund a comfortable life elsewhere. They had researched countries with favorable extradition laws, investigated methods for assuming new identities, and even discussed ways to make Marcus's death appear accidental so they could claim life insurance benefits. "You were never meant to discover this," Victoria explained to Marcus. According to their communications, they planned to continue the theft for another 18 months before staging your disappearance. They had researched hiking trails where people go missing, and Dmitri had even taken out additional life insurance policies on you without your knowledge. The room fell silent as the full implications of this revelation settled over everyone present. They hadn't just wanted to rob Marcus, they had been planning to murder him. The woman who had promised to love and cherish him until death do them part had been actively planning his death to complete her theft of his life. Marcus looked at Serafina, searching her face for any sign of the woman he had thought he married, any hint of remorse or recognition of the magnitude of what she had planned. But he saw only cold calculation and a kind of frustrated anger that their scheme had been discovered before they could complete it. "The federal investigators will be here shortly," Victoria announced, gathering the evidence into neat stacks. "I've arranged for you both to be taken into custody here rather than at your homes or workplaces, as a courtesy to Mr. Wellington, who wanted to avoid the public spectacle of watching his wife and brother arrested." Even in his rage and betrayal, Marcus had thought about protecting their dignity, had wanted to spare them the humiliation of a public arrest. It was a kindness they certainly didn't deserve, a consideration they had never shown him when they were systematically destroying his life. But it was also a reflection of the man he was choosing to remain, despite everything they had done to him. As federal agents entered the conference room to take Serafina and Dmitri into custody, Marcus watched his old life officially end. The woman he had loved was handcuffed and led away, her face now showing nothing but contempt for him. The brother he had protected and supported was processed like any other criminal, his charm finally useless in the face of overwhelming evidence. But as devastating as the moment was, Marcus also felt something he hadn't experienced in months: relief. The confusion that had plagued him was finally gone, replaced by clear understanding of what had been done to him and why. The gaslighting that had made him question his own perceptions was over, validated by evidence that proved his instincts had been correct even when he had ignored them. Victoria watched the arrests with professional satisfaction, then turned to Marcus with something approaching warmth in her usually stern expression. "The federal prosecutors are confident they can recover most of your stolen assets," she said. "The properties Dmitri purchased with your money will be seized and sold, and the shell company accounts will be frozen and returned to you. It won't be everything, but it will be enough to rebuild." Rebuild. The word carried both promise and weight. Marcus would need to reconstruct not just his finances, but his entire approach to trust and relationships. He would need to learn how to love again without the naive assumption that his feelings would be automatically reciprocated. He would need to become someone stronger and wiser, someone who could protect himself without becoming cynical or closed off to genuine connection. As he left Victoria's office that afternoon, Marcus walked through a city that looked exactly the same as it had that morning, but felt completely different. The streets he had driven with Serafina, the restaurants where they had celebrated anniversaries, the park where he and Dmitri had played as children, all of it was now part of a different story. A story about betrayal and justice, rather than love and family. But it was also the beginning of a new story, one that Marcus would write himself without the interference of people who had never truly cared about his welfare. For the first time in months, He felt like the author of his own life, rather than a character in someone else's elaborate deception. The reckoning was complete, but the real work of rebuilding was just beginning. 6 months later, Marcus Wellington stood in the conference room of his redesigned offices, looking out at a city that sparkled with possibility. The federal prosecutors had exceeded Victoria's expectations, recovering nearly 90% of the stolen funds and securing convictions that would keep Serafina and Dmitri in federal prison for the next 15 years. The network of accomplices had been dismantled. With corrupt bank managers, dishonest accountants, and fraudulent real estate agents all facing their own consequences for participating in the elaborate scheme. Marcus had used the recovered funds not just to restore his company, but to expand it, implementing new oversight procedures and ethical guidelines that would prevent anyone from ever again using his trust as a weapon against him. He had also established a foundation to help other victims of financial fraud, understanding that his experience, as devastating as it had been, had given him unique insight into the devastating impact of white-collar crime on families and small businesses. The divorce had been finalized quickly, with Serafina's criminal conviction making any attempt to claim assets impossible. Marcus had kept the house but completely renovated it, erasing every trace of the life he had shared with someone who had never actually existed. He had also reconciled with other family members who had been kept at a distance by Serafina's subtle manipulations, discovering relationships that had been damaged by her careful isolation of him from potential sources of support and perspective. Perhaps most importantly, Marcus had learned to trust his instincts again. The confusion and self-doubt that had plagued him during the months of deception had been replaced by a quiet confidence in his ability to read people and situations accurately. He was more cautious now, certainly, but not cynical. He understood that evil existed in sophisticated forms, but he also knew that genuine love and loyalty were equally real and equally powerful. As he watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Marcus reflected on the strange gift that betrayal had ultimately given him. By destroying his illusions, Serafina and Dmitri had freed him to build something better than what he had lost. By showing him the worst of human nature, they had helped him appreciate the best when he encountered it again. By stealing his naive trust, they had helped him develop wisdom. The phone on his desk rang, interrupting his contemplation. It was his assistant, informing him that his dinner companion had arrived. Marcus smiled, straightening his tie as he prepared to meet the woman who had entered his life 3 months ago. A fellow survivor of financial fraud who understood both his scars and his strength. Their relationship was built on truth rather than deception, on mutual respect rather than exploitation, on the hard-won knowledge that real love was worth waiting for and fighting to protect. As Marcus walked toward his future, he carried with him the lessons of betrayal, but not its bitterness. He had learned that trust must be earned rather than freely given, that love must be proven rather than simply declared, and that the greatest revenge against those who try to destroy you is to build something better than what they took away. The story of Marcus Wellington's betrayal had ended, but the story of Marcus Wellington's triumph was just beginning. The elevator descended to the ground floor with a soft whisper, carrying Marcus toward a future that felt both uncertain and promising. As the doors opened, he saw her standing in the marble lobby, her silhouette elegant against the evening light filtering through the tall windows. Dr. Elena Vasquez turned at the sound of his footsteps, and the smile that spread across her face was like sunshine after a long winter storm. Elena had entered his life through the foundation he had established for fraud victims. She was a forensic psychologist who specialized in helping people recover from financial abuse, and their first meeting had been purely professional. Marcus had sought her expertise in understanding the psychological manipulation techniques that Serafina and Dmitri had used against him, wanting to ensure that the Foundation's resources addressed not just the financial devastation, but the emotional trauma that accompanied sophisticated deception. What he hadn't expected was the way Elena listened. Not with the clinical detachment of a therapist or the calculating interest of someone seeking advantage, but with the genuine empathy of someone who had walked through similar fire and emerged stronger. Her ex-husband had been a respected investment advisor who had used their marriage as cover for a Ponzi scheme that destroyed dozens of families. Like Marcus, she had discovered that the person she trusted most in the world had been systematically destroying everything she held dear. "You look thoughtful," Elena observed as they walked through the lobby toward the restaurant. Her voice carried a slight accent, a reminder of her childhood in Barcelona, and Marcus had come to associate that melodic cadence with honesty and warmth. After years of Serafina's perfectly modulated American English hiding layers of deception, Elena's authentic voice was like clear water after years of drinking poison. "I was thinking about how different everything looks now," Marcus replied, holding the door for her as they stepped into the crisp evening air. "6 months ago, I thought I knew what my life was. Now I realize I didn't know anything at all." They walked slowly toward the restaurant, in no hurry to reach their destination. These evening walks had become precious to Marcus, moments when the city revealed its secrets to those patient enough to observe. Street musicians played on corners, their music mixing with the sounds of traffic and conversation. Couples strolled hand in hand, their easy intimacy a reminder that genuine connection was possible even after devastating betrayal. "Knowledge and wisdom are different things," Elena said, her hand finding his as they paused at a crosswalk. "6 months ago, you had knowledge of facts that turned out to be false. Now you have wisdom earned through experience. Wisdom is more valuable, even though it costs more to acquire." The restaurant Elena had chosen was small and intimate, the kind of place that prioritized conversation over spectacle. They were seated at a corner table where they could observe the other diners while maintaining their privacy. Marcus watched Elena study the menu, noting the way she considered each option carefully before making her decision. It was such a contrast to Serafina's approach to dining, which had always involved elaborate performances of indecision, followed by choices clearly designed to project sophistication rather than satisfy genuine preference. "There's something I need to tell you," Elena said after they had ordered. Her tone was serious, and Marcus felt a familiar flutter of anxiety in his chest. Months of deception had left him hypersensitive to changes in conversational tone, always braced for the revelation of hidden truths or concealed agendas. Elena must have noticed his tension because she reached across the table and took his hand. "It's nothing bad," she said softly. "At least I hope you won't think it's bad. But I believe in transparency, especially given what we've both been through." Marcus nodded, forcing himself to relax. Elena had earned his trust through consistent honesty and genuine care for his welfare. If she had something difficult to share, it would be because she respected him enough to tell him the truth rather than protect him through deception. "I've been offered a position," Elena continued. "The FBI wants me to head their new victim services program for financial crimes. It would mean moving to Washington, at least for the first 2 years while the program is being established." The news hit Marcus like a cold wave, not because it was unexpected, but because it forced him to confront feelings he hadn't fully acknowledged. Over the past 3 months, Elena had become more than just a companion or even a romantic interest. She had become essential to his sense of hope and possibility, a living reminder that trust could be rebuilt and that love could exist without deception. When would you need to start? He asked, surprised by how steady his voice sounded despite the turmoil in his chest. Next month, Elena replied. Marcus, I haven't accepted yet because I wanted to talk to you first. What we have together, it's become very important to me. More important than I expected when we first met. Marcus studied her face, searching for any sign of the calculated manipulation he had learned to recognize. But Elena's expression showed only honest uncertainty and genuine concern for his feelings. She wasn't trying to manipulate his response or engineer a particular outcome. She was simply sharing information that affected both of their futures and trusting him to respond with the same honesty she had shown. It's an incredible opportunity, Marcus said finally. You could help thousands of people, maybe change how the system responds to financial crime victims. You'd be crazy not to take it. Elena's smile was tinged with sadness. That's very generous of you to say. But it doesn't address the question of what happens to us. The question hung between them like smoke, visible but intangible. Marcus realized that this moment was a test, not of Elena's trustworthiness, but of his own ability to love without possessing, to support without controlling. Serafina had taught him about the darker side of relationships, about how love could be weaponized and trust could be exploited. But Elena was offering him the chance to learn something different. That real love sometimes meant supporting someone's dreams, even when those dreams took them away from you. I have a confession to make, Marcus said, feeling the rightness of the decision even as he spoke. I've been thinking about expanding the Foundation's work. There are organizations in other cities that want to partner with us, and I've been considering opening regional offices. Washington would be a logical place to start. Elena's eyes widened with surprise and something that might have been hope. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying that maybe it's time for both of us to take a leap of faith, Marcus replied. Not because we're running away from our pasts, but because we're ready to build something new together. If you'll have me, I'd like to explore Washington with you. The transformation in Elena's expression was like watching the sun rise. The careful composure she maintained as a professional melted away, revealing joy so pure and unguarded that Marcus felt his chest tighten with emotion. This was what real love looked like. Not the performed affection that Serafina had offered, but genuine happiness at the prospect of sharing a future together. There's something else, Elena said, her voice slightly breathless with excitement. The FBI position comes with the authority to establish partnerships with private organizations. Your foundation could become an official partner in their victim services program. We could actually work together, combine your resources with federal authority to create something really meaningful. The possibility was intoxicating. Marcus had established the foundation partly as a way to process his own trauma, but also because he had discovered a genuine passion for helping others navigate the aftermath of financial betrayal. The chance to formalize that work, to give it the backing of federal resources and Elena's expertise, was more than he had dared to imagine. But even as he felt excitement building, Marcus forced himself to consider the practical implications. Moving to Washington would mean leaving behind the city, where he had built his architectural practice, where his employees depended on him, where his professional reputation was strongest. It would mean starting over in many ways, trading the security of known success for the uncertainty of new challenges. What about Wellington and Associates? Elena asked, apparently following his thoughts. You've worked so hard to rebuild after everything that happened. Marcus had been considering this question for weeks, even before Elena's announcement. The firm was stronger than ever, with new leadership structures and ethical guidelines that would prevent future fraud. His senior associates were capable of running daily operations, and modern technology made it possible to maintain oversight from anywhere in the country. The firm can survive without me being physically present every day, he said slowly, working through the logistics as he spoke. In fact, it might be healthier for everyone if I stepped back from day-to-day management. I could focus on strategic direction and major projects while building something new in Washington. They spent the rest of dinner planning their potential future together, sketching out possibilities with the excitement of architects designing their dream home. Elena would accept the FBI position and begin establishing the Victim Services Program. Marcus would open a Washington office of the foundation and explore partnerships with federal agencies. They would find a place to live together, maybe a house with enough space for both of their work and their dreams. As they walked back through the city after dinner, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since before his world collapsed. Genuine excitement about the future. Not just relief that the worst was over. Not just satisfaction at having survived betrayal, but actual anticipation of what lay ahead. Elena had given him more than companionship or even love. She had given him back his sense of possibility. "There's one more thing we need to discuss," Elena said, as they reached the building where Marcus's car was parked. Her tone was playful rather than serious, but Marcus had learned to pay attention to everything she said. "What's that?" "If we're going to be working together professionally as well as being involved personally, we need to establish some ground rules. I've seen too many couples destroy themselves by mixing business with romance." Marcus nodded, appreciating her foresight. Serafina and Dmitri had used their personal relationships as weapons in their professional crimes, blurring the lines between intimacy and exploitation until Marcus couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Elena was right to insist on clear boundaries from the beginning. "What do you suggest?" he asked. "Complete transparency in all business matters," Elena replied promptly. "Separate budgets for Foundation and FBI work, with clear documentation of any overlapping expenses. Regular check-ins to make sure we're both comfortable with how things are developing. And a commitment to honest communication, even when it's difficult." The proposal was both practical and romantic, a recognition that their relationship was valuable enough to protect through careful planning. Marcus thought about the casual way Serafina had mixed their personal and financial lives, how she had used his trust to gain access to information that facilitated her crimes. Elena's insistence on boundaries wasn't a sign of distrust. It was a sign of wisdom and respect for both their professional integrity and their personal connection. "I agree to all of that," Marcus said. "And I'd like to add one more thing. If either of us ever feels uncomfortable with any aspect of our arrangement, we commit to discussing it immediately rather than letting resentment build up." Elena smiled and extended her hand in an exaggerated gesture of formal agreement. "Deal," she said as they shook hands. Then, more softly, "I love that we can plan this together. I love that we can be honest about the challenges and excited about the possibilities at the same time." As Marcus drove home that night, he reflected on the strange journey that had brought him to this moment. 6 months ago, he had been a man whose world was built on lies, whose closest relationships were elaborate deceptions designed to destroy him. The discovery of that betrayal had nearly broken him, forcing him to question everything he thought he knew about love, trust, and human nature. But surviving that betrayal had also freed him to build something better. Without the false security of his marriage to Serafina and his blind trust in Dmitri, Marcus had been forced to develop new skills, new awareness, new strength. He had learned to read people more carefully, to trust more slowly, and to value honesty above comfort or convenience. Most importantly, he had learned the difference between love and performance. Serafina had been a master performer, able to simulate affection and loyalty so convincingly that Marcus had never questioned their authenticity. But Elena's love was different. Less polished, perhaps, but infinitely more real. She didn't perform happiness for his benefit. She simply was happy when they were together. She didn't calculate her responses to maximize his approval. She simply responded honestly to each moment as it came. The house Marcus returned to that night was the same one he had shared with Serafina, but it had been so thoroughly renovated that no trace of their life together remained. He had kept the structure but changed everything else. New paint, new furniture, new landscaping, new memories. It was a metaphor for his entire life. The foundation was solid, but everything built on that foundation had been renewed and strengthened. In his study, Marcus pulled out a legal pad and began making lists of everything that would need to be accomplished before he could move to Washington. The architectural firm would need new management structures. The foundation would need to establish a Washington office. His house would need to be prepared for rental or sale. There were dozens of practical details to consider, but for the first time in years, Marcus felt energized rather than overwhelmed by a major life change. As he worked, his mind wandered to Serafina and Dmitri, currently serving their federal sentences in separate facilities. He wondered if they ever reflected on the choices that had led them to their current circumstances, if they ever considered what they had destroyed in pursuit of money and excitement. Part of him hoped they had found some measure of remorse or understanding, if only for their own peace of mind. But mostly, Marcus found that he thought about them less and less. They had been significant figures in his past, but they were no longer relevant to his future. Their betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been educational. They had taught him valuable lessons about the importance of vigilance, the necessity of boundaries, and the difference between genuine love and skilled manipulation. More importantly, their betrayal had cleared away illusions that might have prevented him from recognizing real love when it finally appeared. Without the false happiness of his marriage to Serafina, Marcus might never have appreciated the authentic joy he found with Elena. Without the painful lesson of Dmitri's deception, he might never have developed the wisdom to build a relationship based on mutual respect and honest communication. As the clock neared midnight, Marcus set aside his planning lists and prepared for bed. Tomorrow he would begin the practical work of transforming his life yet again. But tonight, he allowed himself to simply feel grateful for the unexpected gifts that betrayal had ultimately brought him. He had lost a wife and a brother, but he had gained wisdom, strength, and the kind of love that could only exist between two people who had been tested by fire and emerged stronger. In the distance, he could hear the sounds of the city settling into sleep, traffic diminishing, voices fading, the gentle hum of life continuing its eternal cycle of renewal and hope. Marcus smiled as he turned off the lights, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also new possibilities. The story of his betrayal had ended months ago, but the story of his triumph was still being written, one honest moment at a time. The future stretched ahead like an uncharted map, full of potential destinations and unexpected discoveries. For the first time in years, Marcus Wellington was truly excited to see where the journey would lead.